As I say, only one department, political science, thought it might be a good idea to have an intellectual debate or dialogue. Things would be very different, of course, if I were a convicted terrorist like Laura Whitehorn, who was invited a couple of years ago by the African American Studies Department and presented to unsuspecting students as a civil rights or human rights activist until conservative students at Duke put an ad in the Chronicle to inform the community here of her criminal record. Or if I were a Jew-hating Palestinian terrorist, the head of an organization responsible for over 100 suicide bombings of innocent civilians in the Middle East, including 2 American citizens like Sami al-Arian, then there would be a collection of Duke departments who would put together a symposium on national security and civil liberties and invite me as the keynote speaker, speaking as a civil libertarian. Too bad Al-Arian can't come back this year because he's in jail. Or perhaps if I were a self-declared enemy of Israel, who's made his main claim to fame is writing a book saying the Holocaust is an industry for Jews to make money, like Norman Finkelstein, I would also be welcomed by academic departments here. Or perhaps if I were a washed-up calypso singer who thought that the Bush administration was the Third Reich, like Harry Belafonte, and that Colin Powell was a house slave, I might be invited to celebrate Martin Luther King Day, a $45,000 event, annual event at this year, which has seen a parade of left-wing, quite extreme people like Angela Davis, a lifelong communist and servant of totalitarian regimes. And I might tell you, as I don't think Belafonte did this when he was at Duke, but describe Condoleezza Rice as similar to the Jews that the Third Reich had high up in its hierarchy, showing that he's both ignorant and filled with hate against this country, forgetting as that 60 million and more Americans voted for George Bush twice. Only somebody with contempt for half the country could make such statements. The theme that I noticed while I'm on Martin Luther King Day, the one common theme of Aaron Magruder and Angela Davis and Lenny Guinier and Harry Belafonte is to denigrate the legacy and memory of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was the author of what is perhaps the greatest social revolution in the history of mankind. And yet, what unites these people is their claims that nothing has changed, that America is still a racist society just the way it was from Ogletree, who said it from the time of slavery, to wipe out everything that Martin Luther King did and just use him as a tool of your own radical, anti-American condemnation of this country. That's what Martin Luther King Day is at Duke University. It has been for the last 4 or 5 years. I have in my hand here a book. It's not a list. It's a book. 450 pages, 112,000 words, an argument based on 20 years of visiting campuses like Duke, interviewing students, talking to professors, and thinking about these issues. But this book has been condemned across this country by academics who call it a list. In fact, there's an entire organization called the Coalition for Free Exchange, which has condemned the book as a blacklist. This organization includes the ACLU, the American Association of University Professors, the NEA, the AFT, George Soros's Children's Crusade, People for the American Way. Other condemners, denouncers of this book for the same reason, that it's allegedly a list, look again, are at the Al Jazeera website, Euroknet, which is the Saddam Hussein Ba'athist website, and every left-wing website that thinks that the terrorists are freedom fighters and the United States is the great Satan and, as Harry Belafonte said, the greatest terrorist state. So, why do you think there's all this commentary about a list when there is no list? The only lists you'll find are on left-wing websites. Well, as we all know, the left has an arsenal of verbal bullets to silence and discredit and thereby destroy people who get in its way. Racist. Yeah. We have some people here on mushrooms, I think, or... Racist, sexist, homophobe, reactionary Republican. All these are words on college campuses, and this one in particular, used by the ideological left to shut its opponents up. If you use the wrong word, racist. If you make a politically incorrect remark, say that maybe women have different aptitudes than men in math and men have different aptitudes than women in verbally. And we're at a university, are we? Is this a university? Then you might discover, like Larry Summers, that the thought police are going to shut you up for good and get rid of you, which they did. The attacks on this book have been ridicule and a pack of lies about the book, which, as I say, is an argument. Now, many people object, I guess, to the subtitle, which is the 101 most dangerous academics in America, as though, professor, how can my professor be dangerous? People who have this reaction obviously don't think that ideas have consequences. These are people who also forget that we're in a war against terrorists, against religious fanatics who want to kill every man, woman, and child that is not of their religious faith. I'm going to hold this up because the rest of the country probably doesn't even know, unless they go to page A20 in the New York Times, about this story. This is a Muslim student at the University of North Carolina, not too far from this school, who rented a Jeep and deliberately ran it on campus and into a crowd of students, sending 6 to the hospital and attempting to run them down and kill them. That was an idea that drove him to do this. His lawyer, as he says, is Allah. And the idea is not that dissimilar from the ideas heard on Martin Luther King Day in this university. The idea that America is a terrorist state and has done some great evil to Muslims, when in fact it has liberated 40 to 50 million Muslims. Ideas have consequences. At Duke, in various departments, in fact, I am actually having arrived here yesterday and spent some time looking at what goes on at this university. I'm amazed at the number of courses and the number of events on this campus whose sole purpose is to persuade, if you like, indoctrinate, as I prefer, students in the idea that America is a racist, sexist, oppressive, imperialist empire that deserves to be attacked. That deserves to be attacked. In fact, Harry Belafonte couldn't tell the difference between Muhammad Atta and George Bush at this university just a few weeks ago when he spoke on Martin Luther King Day. This book is an argument about the intellectual corruption of the university. Large parts of this university and universities across America have been converted, really subverted. Their intellectual enterprise has been subverted, and they have been transformed into political parties. The Women's Studies Department at this and every other campus is by no stretch of the imagination an academic department which studies women. It is the party of feminism. It is the party of a Marxist form of feminism which sees America, again, as an oppressive society, which is the root cause of the attacks upon it. Your mother didn't teach you any manners. Everybody, what you're doing is... What you're doing is showing the entire country that the left is anti-intellectual, intellectually bankrupt, and ill-bred. Thank you. There's a gentleman over there who is from the left, maybe, who is going to listen to this and then ask a question at the end and do what is appropriate to a university. The intellectual corruption of the university. Let me give an example. At Ball State University, and these examples are taken from my book here. At Ball State University, there is a peace studies program, which is not really about peace, and is not academic. It pretends to be, it claims to be in the catalog, and lures students to its courses on the grounds that it's a course in the social, economic, political, and cultural causes of war and peace over the history of mankind. That's a big 570-page textbook. But the director of the program, and of course there's no professor of military science on the faculty, as there aren't on the 250 peace studies programs in America. In a democracy, the military is there to preserve the peace. This is really a dialogue, if you will, a difference that divides mankind. There are people who think that human beings are naturally peaceful, and that it's institutions like the military that causes wars. And there are people who understand that the normal state of mankind is war, and peace is an aberration. And what keeps the peace is when you have a concert of powers or a strong enough power to intimidate those who would break the peace. But peace studies programs are not about the study of peace any more than women's studies programs are about the study of women, or black studies and African American studies or studies of African Americans and blacks. It is the party of anti-military party, anti-American party, and sympathy for the terrorist party. George Wolfe, who is the head of the Peace Studies program at Ball State. His academic qualifications for directing a program about the social, economic, political causes of war and peace is that he is a professor of the saxophone. He's a performance artist. He may be a very good saxophonist, but it is a fraud committed on the students at Ball State, defended by the provost and the administration of Ball State, I might say, and by the local press in Indiana, to have a man ignorant, completely unqualified, teaching a program like this in a university. It is a fraud on the taxpayers of Indiana and a fraud on the students. The textbook in the course, Peace Studies and Peace and Conflict Studies, Peace and Conflict Studies by Wabel and Barish, was written by two. I'm just going to do one of them because he's the only one in my book, but Barish is an animal biologist. Has no qualifications for writing a textbook, a university textbook on the causes of war and peace. So when you read the book, it stands out on every page. In his book, no violence is justified except, guess what? Revolutionary violence. Example, Cuba, a totalitarian terrorist state that's inviting the Iranian Nazi into our hemisphere right now. In the book, students read that terrorist is just another name for guerrilla, and explains that guerrilla describes the revolutionaries in North America at the end of the 18th century. That would be Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. I guess the fifth column here doesn't want to be still. I mean, we have in this country a large community of people who are rooting for the enemy in the war against terror. And one of these days, we just had a terrorist incident at the University of North Carolina. It is beyond reason to expect that we will not have another 9/11, and then you people will not be laughing, I assure you. Duke has its own version of this kind of academic fraud. There is at Duke a program called the Marxism and Society program, which is described in the catalog as a course in the theories of Marxism. Now, this is a very complex subject, isn't it? After all, the Marxist theories are directly responsible for the murder of 120 million people since 1917. The starvation of tens of millions. In China alone, something like 50 million people starved because of crackpot Marxist economic theories. The Marxism and Society program includes courses from many departments here, and it's kind of central course in Trinity College. And it's in the literature department. In other words, people wholly ignorant of economics, sociology, political science, history, are teaching undergraduates at Duke who pay $43,000, I'm told now, a year, snookered by the promise that they're going to get experts. There is no more privileged caste in America than professors at universities at Duke. We are talking about people who make $150,000 a year. And obviously these people are illiterate too, because you can read the figures in the Chronicle of Higher Education. $150,000 a year for 5 hours a week in class. 4 months paid vacation, only work 8 months a year. Lifetime jobs. Hope America's listening out there. And why? Why are they so privileged? Because there's a deal was cut many, many years ago, and it's part of the contract that they will be experts in a field. And we are going to protect them because they may draw conclusions that come from knowledge that's so arcane, that requires such dedicated research over so many years, that the laymen are not qualified to judge it. So this is just another aspect of the fraud that's being committed on the people of this country and the parents who send their students, and you students especially, because it's a rare privilege, college, to have 4 years where you can dedicate yourself to exploring ideas with experts, but you are robbed of that. You are robbed of that at Duke. The head of the program, Marxism in Society, she's a professor of literature, Jane Gaines. But she actually isn't a professor of literature. She is a film critic. All of her writings are on cinema. How does a woman whose expertise will give her that is in cinema, how can she preside over a program which is about the most serious consequences, the most murderous regimes in human history, the most oppressive? There's no real answer to that. Of course, this course was founded by Michael Hart, who is an icon at this university, who is the co-author, his co-author in his absurd attempts to revive a brain-dead theory, Marxism, is a convicted Italian terrorist who is, I believe he's still under house arrest for participating in the kidnapping of Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro, and assassinating him. This is Duke University. This is a travesty. My book has many professors who are far worse than Michael Hart. Hamid Algar is a full professor at the University of California, Berkeley, is an ardent follower of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who in Tehran, before 9/11, called for armed jihad, holy war, against the West and the elimination of Israel from the face of the earth. And who, when he encountered Armenian students at a table on the Berkeley campus memorializing the Turkish genocide of Armenians, the Turks killed 1 million Armenians, gotten into an altercation with the Armenian students and told them, "You deserve to be massacred." And when the students appealed to the administration, they got nothing. Imagine a professor saying to black students at any university, "You deserve to be slaves." Think of what would happen to him. Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn in the 1970s were leaders of a terrorist cult in America called the Weather Underground. They're responsible for 30 bombings, including the Capitol and the Pentagon. Their followers planned to detonate a nail bomb at a social dance at Fort Dix, which would be attended by 18-year-old draftees and their dates. Bill Ayers wrote a memoir about this and was interviewed favorably, I may say, by the New York Times on September 11th, 2001. Bad timing. And said in the interview, "My only regret is we didn't bomb enough." Bill Ayers is today a professor of early childhood education at the University of Illinois Chicago campus. He actually has the title Distinguished Professor of Early Childhood Education, which is extra money and extra prestige. You might ask yourself, given that there are maybe 100 applicants for every opening on a faculty, how the Department of Early Childhood Education at the University of Illinois thought that being an unrepentant terrorist was a job recommendation. To distinguished professor, Bill Ayers had to be voted on by his entire department twice, when he got tenure and when he got the full professorship. And he had to receive 12 minimum recommendations from experts in the field. And he had to be passed on by his dean and by the central administration. So what that tells you is that the corruption of the university is not 101 professors. It's more like, as I say in my book, 50,000. It's fields, it's whole departments that are corrupt. There are professors sitting on this department that are just political ideologues. No scholarship, no publication. 5 hours work a week, 4 months paid vacation. And if you wonder why administrations don't do anything about it, is because they are intimidated by the radicals, the 10% of a faculty that are political activists and not scholars. And that is what Larry Summers learned at Harvard, the most powerful university president America has ever seen. A distinguished scholar in his field, a former Clinton cabinet member, a political liberal, not liberal enough, and anti-intellectual commissars at the university put an end to his Harvard career, which is going to hurt. I mean, maybe I'll have a little schadenfreude, but hurt Harvard considerably. Bernadine Dorn, Bill Ayers' wife, another unrepentant terrorist. I mean, I read her stuff. It's America's the great Satan, and the terrorists are freedom fighters. She's a law professor at Northwestern University. Ron Karenga, who is the inventor of Kwanzaa and chairman of the Black Studies Department at Cal State Long Beach, spent 4.5 years in jail, having been tried and convicted of torturing 2 of his female followers when he was running a black racist organization called United Slaves in the 1960s. He tortured them with hot soldering irons. Ron Karenga is an icon in the academy. Black studies departments all over the country assign his book because these are not academic departments. These are not scholars, they're political ideologues of the extreme left. This is the first time in American history that the university has become a haven for extremists. It's always, had a place for incompetence and mediocrities, but it has never been a place for political extremists before. I'll tell you how this happened, as my book is partly the story of how this corruption took place. And that is that 60s radicals, my generation, who did not want to serve their country and fight for the freedom of the South Vietnamese and the Cambodians, who were slaughtered thanks to the New Left in America, which forced the United States withdrawal. 2.5 million Indo-Chinese peasants slaughtered by the communist friends of the New Left, who are out there today urging a similar withdrawal from Iraq, which would produce a similar bloodbath, except the blood would also flow in the streets, apparently, of Chapel Hill and Raleigh-Durham, as well as New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Boston and other American cities. These radicals were not scholars. They stayed in school to get deferments from the draft. And they eventually got their doctorates and got on faculties and immediately went to get control of the search and hiring committees. And in fact, they refer to it among each other as Revolution by Search Committee. The complainers about the blacklist Who are they? I mean, with the AFT, the NEA, the AUP, they represent the people who control hiring and have instituted the most successful, largest blacklist in the history of this country. The one that has made Republicans on this campus or conservatives as rare as unicorns. Maybe there are a handful on the entire faculty here. These totalitarian idiots over here are a direct product of universities like this. This does not happen in a university that had standards. They seized control of the search and hiring committees. They have driven conservatives out of the faculties. The ratio, well, I don't have to go into that. It's in my book. There is a law of social group psychology, well established. Cass Sunstein, a liberal law professor at the University of Chicago, has written an article on this. It's called the law of group polarization. And the law says that when a room is filled with like-minded people, the center of the room tends to move to the extreme. And that's obvious because everybody's prejudices are reinforced and assumptions. And George Bush is Hitler, Condoleezza Rice is a house slave. Judgment is lost. And people vie, since everybody is reinforced and nobody challenges such ludicrous stupidities. Ego takes over and people are always pushing the envelope. How outrageous, how outrageous a position can I take? Let's see, I'm going to defend child molesters. And then you're a professor of anthropology at the University of Michigan and an icon of the feminist field, and your name is Gail Rubin. Or you will compare the bombers of 9/11, Muhammad Atta and his crew, to the founding fathers. They're too numerous to mention. Or you will, if you're the head of an ethnic studies department in University of Texas, Arlington, like Jose Gutierrez, you'll call for the elimination of the gringo, and explain that means kill white people. Or you will be a rank racist like Amiri Baraka. And you trot around the universities and get $10,000 or $15,000 a year from your political comrades at these universities. The debasement of the university, the abysmal standards of the university. It's never in its history has the intellectual standard at American universities been so low. And I want to make very clear that that does not affect the physics department, the real world departments, where there's a bottom line to everything. But it does affect English, literature, black studies, women's studies, abysmally low grade intellectual abilities. When I was the editor, as I was, of the largest magazine of the left, I wouldn't have looked at an article to pick somebody who has attacked me for having no scholarly integrity on this campus, Juanima Lubiano, one of these ideologues. I'm glad her students are here. This is a perfect example of academic fraud. This woman has tenure. Tenure used to mean at least one book. This woman has no books. What she has is a collection of political trash by Angela Davis and, the Bloviators, Cornel West, called The House That Race Built, that was published 15 years ago. And then if you look on her website, she has a book and it says forthcoming. That's this year. Well, if you look up on those websites, you'll see that same book was forthcoming in 1997. They're not coming. She runs programs at the Institute for U.S. Critical Studies. There's a clever title. the Attack America Institute at Duke. I read their syllabus. I know what they held a conference just back in November called Genealogies of the Left, where you get, cycles of struggle. I don't have to go, welcome from the director of Marxism and Society. That's the film critic that knows nothing about Marxism or society. History of the Communist Popular Front from an enthusiastic point of view. Black Power, speaker for the Communist Workers' Party. I was a radical in the days when these people were playing the fool in North Carolina. This was a sectarian communist party who inserted itself into a community that was completely alien to it, just went in to organize, and announced that they were going to have a Death to the Klan rally. So the Klan came and killed them. They're giving lectures now at Duke, and she's still a communist. A film about how American soldiers in Vietnam were war criminals. That's the Winter Soldier investigation, which has been many times exposed. Anti-war and anti-empire organizing. We're the empire. Okay, I don't have... And then the last panel, this is a two-day affair, paid for out of Duke funds, your $43,000 a year that goes to these charlatans. And here's the description. And the last panel is student activists. In other words, recruiting students to communist and other left-wing anti-American organizations. That's what Duke is in the business of these days. And of course, it's not just Duke. That's what George Wolfe is doing at Ball State. Harry Targ, a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and this is the Angela Davis wing, they got expelled because they didn't support the coup against Gorbachev. He's the head of the Peace Studies program at Purdue. And what he does is he takes his students on trips to Cuba, the terrorist state, which is a socialist model, of course, and where every defect is, of course, America did it. Hitler did it. And shows them films on the promotional films for the Marxist guerrillas in Mexico, the Zapatistas. There's a whole Duke House program here. Oh, great. Applaud terrorists. That's wonderful. Just think about how that's going over on, in the C-SPAN audience, where people see that students who are at the most privileged young people in America. I mean, you're at the university that's number 5 in the nation, and somehow you've got, not your wing of this university, your wing. And let me tell you something. I have been totally misrepresented as saying, I don't want to purge universities of left-wingers. I want to purge the universities of idiots. I have been to 2 left-wing campuses, Reed College, which has a perfectly traditional curriculum, which I would recommend. Kenyon College, another very liberal school, traditional curriculum. And one of the reasons is no women's studies and no black studies, because those are not academic fields, they're political parties. And what they do is they percolate throughout the university and corrupt the intellectual enterprise. And because if you say boo to a feminist or to an African American faculty member, you are toast. And that's the reality on campus. That's what Larry Summers learned. He called in Cornel West, who makes easily $1 million a year at the academic racket, easily, who is a bloviating fool who did not do any academic work. He hasn't published a scholarly paper, Cornel West, in 20 years. He spent the year that Larry Summers came in advising first Bill Bradley as politics, then Ralph Nader, then Reverend Al in his presidential run, and all the time making a rap record on which he, Cornel West, was the rapper, which he described on his own website as a watershed in the history of music. I mean, you have to understand, if you are a black academic like Cornel West, and look, the man is a real entertainer. He can rap to a crowd. Your head is so swell. He has 20 honorary degrees for nothing. No academic work. He's not a scholar. And Larry Summers just said, Professor West, this is Harvard. Could you please produce a book that's reviewed in a peer-reviewed, that is an academic journal and not in Time Magazine or the New York Review of Books. And Cornel West walked out, and what did he say? Larry Summers has a problem with black people. Oh, and that got the witch hunters out. Who are the witch hunters on campus? They're the people who, if you laugh at the wrong joke or misuse a word, gotcha. Racist, sexist, homophobe, Republican. Those are the witch hunters. And everybody in this room who's on a faculty here, who's not one of them, knows exactly what I'm talking about. And Larry Summers, within 4 days, was on his knees begging Cornel West not to leave. Of course, he got an even higher paying job at Princeton, because the whole university system in the liberal arts is corrupt. I make exceptions, as I said, for Kenyon, for Reed, in my experience. And I'm sure there are some other schools, but there are not many. Ideas have consequences. We have now generations of American students who are being taught to despise their own country, who are filled with paranoid delusions about America being the Third Reich, about oppression in this country. Utter contempt for black people on the part of the left. If America is a racist country that oppresses black people, why do so many Haitians want to come here? Why would black people all over the world, not just black people, but brown people, why are they dying to get into America? Because they are freer in this country, freer, more privileged, and with more rights than they are in their own homelands, which are run by black and brown people. That's the reality. America out there understands it, but in the university, we are in a war on terror. It's important to appreciate your country when your country is under attack from religious fanatics who do have access to nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and will visit them on you one of these days. It is true that America inherited a slave system, but that is a very minor truth in the scale of humanity, since every society in human history has had slavery, and everyone in this room, regardless of race, if you go far back enough, is descended from slaves. What is remarkable about America is that it was founded on the idea that all men are created equal, and within 90 years eliminated slavery from the Western Hemisphere. That is what is remarkable. And how dare the racist ideologues at this university not have, first of all, speakers like Aaron Magruder, who wished that after 9/11, since 90% of the American people supported a response to the terrorists, he wished the other 10% were black. What a racist. Why aren't white people part? Why aren't they speakers? Since, you think the civil rights movement would have been anywhere? 50% of the freedom riders from the North were Jews, not just white, but Jews. A Jew was a strategist behind the Brown v. Board of Education, behind desegregation. Created the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, also a Jew. A Jew was the strategist for Martin Luther King and his chief fundraiser, Stanley Levison. And yet there is no department on a college campus probably more filled with venom against Jews than the departments that celebrate or that have control, I should put it, over Martin Luther King Day celebrations. What is remarkable about America is where we have come, not where we have been, not where we started. The war in Iraq is, after all, a war against terror and for democracy. And it is a disgrace that so large a part of the American left, with very few exceptions, Christopher Hitchens, Paul Berman, people like that, very isolated minorities in the left, that the left should turn its back against a freedom struggle, because that is what is going on in Iraq. Even if we are defeated, even if the situation in Iraq turns into a civil war, we have done what we could with half the country defecting from the war in the middle of the war to bring freedom to the people, to the Muslims of Iraq. And we have liberated tens of millions of women who never voted in 5,000 years before, who are members of the governments of Afghanistan and Iraq. And of course, the women's studies, the feminist political party called Women's Studies on college campuses couldn't care less about those women, just as they couldn't care about the fact that 1 million Chinese girls, baby girls, are murdered every single year in China because of government policy. I'll bet there's a few people in this room who have heard that, and that's because the left is silent on it. Couldn't care, because if China being a communist regime, in their eyes, it's somehow part of the left, part of the movement for social justice, some justice. There are lakes in China where they have signs, do not drown your babies in this lake. If you look at the war in Iraq, you will see America. The general in charge of Central Command during the Iraq War was John Abizaid, an Arab American. The general in charge of our troops inside Iraq was Ricardo Sanchez, a Hispanic American. The chief presidential advisor on the war in Iraq, then director of the National Security Council, now Secretary of State, representing America to the entire world, is an African-American woman whose childhood friend was blown up in Birmingham in 1963. Is now the most powerful woman in the world. The ambassador to Iraq, our ambassador, is an Iraqi American. There has never been in the history of the world a country like America, a country to be proud of, unlike the America that is presented to students at Duke University. It's important to be proud of your country, because if you're not, Because if you're not proud of your country, you cannot defend yourself. Thank you. I will take questions, if there are questions, and civil. Yeah, is there somebody with a mic? There's a mic over here. Is there a mic?
All right, we're going to come around and take questions.
Steve, you want to?
So
This
we'll just do this in the most democratic way we can. All right, well, I'm hesitant to let you talk, considering you came here to show your contempt for the exchange of ideas.
Why did I make the list?
But to show that I'm a better person than you are, I'm going to let you ask a question. Just please keep it respectful.
You won't let me take the mic. Would you just let me hold it?
That's what we do for all the speakers. It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah. Steve, you hold it.
I actually have 3 very short questions. The first is, why didn't I make it into your book? I know my book is shorter than yours. Yeah. It was only 398 pages, but I wish I'd made it in the book. I tried very hard. I'm sorry, can I just ask the questions?
You asked the question, I'm
secondly, we were promised professors exposed, so I guess I was hoping for a little more TNA. And 3, I wonder if you could get so little funding for this, how you managed to pay for so many full-page ads in the Chronicle, for all of the advertising.
Duke Student Government and Young America's Foundation.
I will answer this. For those who can't see, this young woman is wearing a T-shirt, "Why didn't I make the list?" The answer is, I guess you weren't smart enough. Next. Take one from this side.
I'm just curious, you started off by pointing out to several examples of extremist views expressed on campus. You didn't really give a clear idea of like what you want to see done. Do you want there to be balance, or do you want these extreme ideas to be completely removed so that students don't hear them? Or do you want, you didn't really give a clear answer to that.
That's a good question. I have never, to my knowledge, used the word balance, although, there's a large campaign of misrepresentation of what I do. A large campaign of just flat out lying about what I do. I was part of the motivation for my academic freedom campaign is my experience at Columbia in the 1950s. My parents were communists, and I wrote Marxist papers in Columbia in a period where it was the height of the Cold War. It was not a happy atmosphere for people like me. And my professors were entirely professional. In my entire college career, I never heard a professor utter a political comment or or express a political point of view in the classroom. It was all academic. I wrote my papers, and they were graded like every other 17-year-old in the class. I'm very grateful to my professors for doing that. I also got a lot of, through that experience, tremendous respect for the academic system in place then, which had standards, both for its professors and for its students. I would like to see those standards restored. I think the only way those standards can be restored is from within the university. It has to be done by the university itself. You got a problem there because you have an entrenched professoriate, faculty, which pretty well understands that it's intellectually not up to the grade, that they're not scholars, whose agendas are political and who are vicious in their attacks, will disrupt a speech, so making it more difficult for how many hundred people here who came to listen, to take it in, who will call you a racist. I didn't read what Nima Lubiano said. She just showed how low grade her intellect is, called me all kinds of names to students who invited me. And the issue is not the money. The issue is whether this university welcomes an intellectual dialogue. I didn't come here to shout and pretend to laugh and make noises. I came here to share my ideas. So you have a very difficult situation because the faculty runs the university. I mean, that's just the reality. Larry Summers' experience should tell you that. I've visited with many college presidents, and that's what they say. The faculty runs the university. Therefore, one has to bring in, or bring to play on this, other forces. The best would be students. That's why I formed Students for Academic Freedom. Students have to demand professional behavior from their professors. The issue is not whether your professor is a Marxist. The issue is whether the professor is professional, whether he or she has academic qualifications to teach you about the economic, social, cultural foundations of society, or whether they're just sharing their ignorance, which seems to me to be the case with the Marxism. How can you have a course in Marxism and society in the literature department? How can you have one without confronting the fact that Marx, as an economist, was a crackpot? He was wrong. Millions of people have starved because of Marxist ideas. If a professor here were a Nazi, would you say, oh, well, we'll look at Hitler's ideas without looking at their consequences? Of course you wouldn't. But that's what's going on at this school. So students really have to stand up for themselves. You need to have a student bill of rights. Which says that professors will be professional in the classroom. Actually, the American Association of University Professors, in its better days, has devised a perfectly reasonable standard for professors. That's where I got, my academic bill of rights. The only real innovation in my academic bill is that it codifies them and says they're student rights. If it's a professor's responsibility to behave professionally in a classroom, then it's a student's right. You pay $43,000 a year. You're giving 4 years of your life. You deserve better. You deserve better than what's being fed to you in many, many courses in this school. I was told today about a writing course. Freshmen have to take a writing course, which is all about globalization, by somebody who, what? He's reading The Nation, maybe. That's where he gets his ideas about globalization. That's not what a university is for. You're supposed to get expertise. I am inviting the American public also. That's why I wrote this book. Because I'll tell you something, the trustees at this school and every other school have no idea what's going on inside it. They are people who are doing wonderful things for these schools, trustees. They're raising money, they're building buildings, new programs, but they are not aware of what's going on inside the university. That is going to change. That is going to change in the high schools, and it's going to change as a result of this campaign. So, I hope the universities respond quickly, because I don't myself feel that that there can be a solution in any kind of public intrusion into the university. But if the public gets disgruntled enough, if enough money is withheld, if trustees, if enough phone calls, better yet, are made to trustees and to President Broadhead of this school, and I don't really want to single out Duke, because things are they're worse at Columbia, so far as I can tell, which is my alma mater, and other schools. I think things will change. I think we have seen now, in the last 2 years, the beginning of a national movement which will change universities for the better.
Earlier in the talk, you referred to the term dangerous. On your book cover, the term dangerous.
Yes.
And I want to read something you wrote recently in an article entitled "Who's Afraid of David Horowitz?" This is February 27th. It said, "The dangerous theme, which has provided critics with a federal case, is a marketing motif dreamed up by the publisher and is confined to the subtitle and the flap copy. The word dangerous does not appear anywhere in the text, and the notion that these professors are dangerous forms no part of the argument of the book. But then last week on Scarborough Country, you said this. You said there are 50,000 professors with the views of your fellow guest, Michael Rechtenwald, and Colorado high school teacher Jay Benish, who are anti-American, they're radicals, they identify with the terrorists, they think of them as freedom fighters. It's a huge danger for the country.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, did somebody ghostwrite the February 27th essay, or are you just a hypocrite?
No. No, the February 27th essay was accurate. I wrote the entire book, and the subtitle was put on afterwards. I kind of had an epiphany today, actually. Well, I did, and it was because of the terrorist incident at Chapel Hill, and it was from being immersed in the ravings of Juanima Lubiano and other professors on this campus in indoctrination courses. The Zapatistas, by the way, are an entire course. They're called house courses at this university, where professors are encouraging students to think that Marxist guerrillas are the wave of the future. And it occurred to me, I mean, I've always felt that they were, if you read the book, which you obviously haven't, they are a danger to the academic enterprise. And I really didn't, when I was writing the book, focus entirely on academic extremists. There are several professors in the book. Todd Gitlin is one, Victor Navasky is another, Michael Berube is another, who are in the book because they have colluded in making the situation possible. So, you know, I don't really see a huge contradiction that you seem to see. I think anybody, you know, reading the book will see that the book is about intellectual corruption in the university that has given rise to rampant extremists. I mean, Ward Churchill, of course, was the inspiration for the book. I happen to be somebody who defended his right to say reprehensible things on the internet and not be fired for it. Oh, thank you. You know, America is a democracy, and, you know, there are people who will go off the deep end at both ends. But a university needs to establish certain standards. And what's happened in our universities is those standards are no longer in place, and there are extremists on this campus and others, and they are indoctrinating students. What goes on in the Institute for U.S. Critical Studies is not remotely academic. It is indoctrination, and it's you know, it's capturing students for radical agendas, which I lived through. I mean, I saw the consequences of what my generation of radicals did, and I said, there's blood all over Southeast Asia because of Tom Hayden and Jane Fonda and John Kerry and all those people who thought it was a great idea for the United States to cut and run and let the communists win. And if you watch the debate between John O'Neill and John Kerry on the Cavett Show, that was the issue. John O'Neill said, if we cut in now, there'll be 100,000 dead. Actually, there was 2.5 million. And John Kerry said, no, there'll only be about 5,000 and they will have deserved it. That is the dispute. And I was on one side of it then, and I'm on another side now because I have learned from a very bad experience. Many people have learned nothing from living their whole lives on this planet.
I can't think of a more valid pursuit than the valid of a diversity of thought on a college campus. And reading the Academic Bill of Rights, the actual language of it does seem to reflect that. But I think the problem people have is how that pursuit doesn't match up to your methods, at least the stuff that we've seen at Duke as far as trying to get professors, really bullying professors, and the obvious partisanship.
I'm sorry, really what?
Bullying professors.
Bullying?
Yes. That's
an interesting idea. Let me remind you, professors, They work 5 hours a week. They work 8 months a year. They have lifetime jobs. Ward Churchill is still a professor at the University of Colorado. His president was forced to resign. So very difficult for me to bully professors. But I understand your question. And this is the answer. When I first devised the Bill of Rights, I took it to the chairman of the Regents of the State University of New York system, which has 400,000 students, 69 campuses. And he was very enthusiastic about it and said, I will put it in his policy. No legislation, no public campaign. And I waited and waited, and I saw that he was paralyzed because of the very syndrome that confronted Larry Summers. The central administrations of these universities are powerless to establish standards in the face of opposition from the radical left. The radical left is in control of the American Association of University Professors. I have been attacked. My Bill of Rights has been attacked by Joan Wallach Scott, who is the chairman of the Academic Freedom Committee of the AAUP, as the pro-Sharon lobby. You got that? The pro-Sharon lobby, it wants an academic Bill of Rights. So I was left with an alternative of doing nothing or going to legislatures and going to the public and getting people aroused, if you will, to the problem. And all I have done in this book, if you read this book doesn't label people, it doesn't attack people, it presents them. Hamid Algar, the follower of Ayatollah Khomeini, I would just quote his speeches. What you have here is professors don't want to be accountable. This is a scandal bigger than Enron. And it's not about money, it's about young people's minds and the future of the country. And professors don't want anybody looking at what they do. Well, I got news for them. We live in a democracy. And I am going to go to the people. That's what I have done. I've gone to the people. And that means, inevitably, a conflict. And the conflict can be resolved very quickly if universities will do the right thing. Start establishing the standards. Stop professors from giving political rants in the classroom. The high school student in Colorado, Sean Allen, is a national hero for exposing what's going on in the classroom. A rant by this Jay Benish, a rant at 14-year-olds about how the people in the World Trade Center on 9/11 deserve what they got, the Ward Churchill line. Why? Because they were FBI agents. News for you, the FBI is protecting you from terrorists. Because they were CIA agents. News for you, the CIA is on the front line of the war against terror. And worst of all, because they were businessmen. Because what ignorant professors at this school who know nothing about economics, I guarantee you it does not come from the economics department at this school. It comes from the literature department and the Black Studies department, where you have collective ignorance that is as big as Everest. That's where the corporations are evil. Or you get it from, linguistic professors at MIT. Corporations are evil. America presses. Corporations have made more people wealthy, or do so every day, than all the socialists put together did in their entire lifetimes. Steve?
First of all, thank you for the great speech. One thing that seemed to me was that you conflated somewhat, anti-Americanism with in unacceptable lies, and you suggested that people should be taught to be proud of America. Does this mean that everything that makes one proud is correct? And is there true stuff that may actually be highly critical of America and that is acceptable?
The question is really, in a democracy, can there be critics of a war, right? The answer is yes. However, you need to have standards for judging criticism. when somebody says that the Bush administration is the Third Reich, in my book, they're already certifiable. These are people who are living in an alternate reality, out of touch with the world. And when you're in the midst of a war, and people are mobilized to defeat you in the war, which is what a good section of the left is about, they cross a line. And I know this from personal experience because I was a leader of the anti-war movement in the 60s. I wrote books about it. I was out there demonstrating. And I saw what we did. And I saw what I did. And, you know, and as I say, I learned, a lot of your professors learned nothing. So it's a judgment call. If you read my website, you'll know I put Todd Gitlin on my website as a patriotic anti-war activist. In this book, I acknowledge that Todd Gitlin supported the war in Afghanistan and that Michael Berube did. And, you know, they have disagreements about the war in Iraq, and that's fine with me. And Todd Gitlin does not go around, I think, calling Bush Hitler. He does not say, like Al Gore, who I do think has some psychological problems, that the president betrayed the country, or Teddy Kennedy, who said that Bush sent innocent young Americans to die for Texas oil companies. This is rubbish, and it is rubbish that gets Americans killed. We are in a war. In a war, you don't have the same latitude and the same freedom as you do in peacetime, because you get people in your own community killed if you do. Right now, the University of North Carolina is refusing to call this a terrorist act. Their first reflex is protect the terrorist. Think about that one. Yes, sir.
A great deal of time defending capitalism and spending all your time talking about how we're paying $43,000 a year to go here. So do you really think that, you know, I and Duke students in general are so stupid that we don't realize what we're getting ourselves into when we take a Marxism studies class? And since, you know, the university system as a whole is bound by this free market system, why, if there's such this great public outswelling against these terrorist professors, haven't students started spending their monies at, you know, other universities that are more approving for you?
Did I forget? First place, I said nothing about Marxist studies as such. What I said was that when you're taught Marxist studies by a film critic, you're being snookered, and you're you know, a participant in or the victim of consumer fraud. That's what I said. And apparently, if you don't realize that, you're not intelligent enough. The second thing is, if you haven't noticed, universities are feudal institutions, pre-capitalist. They're hierarchical. Did I mention that the professors here have lifetime jobs? You know, go find me somebody in the public sector. If you want a trade that has lifetime, in the public, in the outer world, that has lifetime jobs. Radio talk show hosts don't get lifetime jobs. Politicians don't get lifetime jobs. They deal in opinion. So why should professors who have nothing to offer but their opinions, and they don't have an expertise, an animal biologist writing about war and peace, what good is he? Why don't you just, instead of paying the $43,000 or whatever, they don't pay that much at the University of Washington, just turn on talk radio. You can get it for free.
What's your expertise to be here tonight?
Well, let's say 50 years of experience with universities.
All right. Hi.
And I don't have a lifetime job either.
Hi there. Paul Graves, Duke Law School. How are you? I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what you think should or will happen going forward in the wake of the Larry Summers experience, and if you think that it's gotten, because it's gotten quite a bit of press, if you think any changes are going to come about or
Well,
anything like
I
that.
think Harvard is going to have many bad years as a result of. I mean, Larry Summers, after all, was somebody who fit into the liberal community. You have to recognize that the universities, 90% of university faculties are on the left, and it's going to get worse in the next generation because there's a blacklist. So Larry Summers was great for Harvard. I mean, he tried to change that culture, and he failed. University presidents all around the country will watch that, and they're bound to be more intimidated by the political activists on their faculty. However, the rest of the country is looking at that, and trust me, the rest of the country is getting a very different view of universities than they've had in the past. And that will mean changes. This university does not exist in a vacuum. It requires hundreds of millions of dollars that come from people who don't have lifetime jobs, don't run around a campus with 5 hours of work to do and the rest of the time to indoctrinate young people who don't have their experience and knowledge, a very easy thing to do, and who would not be happy watching this C-SPAN show, not be happy reading my book, which will get out to a lot of people. Those of you who are so, read every word I say, I must write 100, 200,000 words a year and parse every, why don't you look at the responses to my book by the, Roger Bowen of the AAUP and all these professors, like Juan Cole, who on one day threatens to sue me, which he can't because this book is true. The facts are there. Truth is a defense. You can't, against libel. No, that's why there are no suits. One day he's saying he'll sue me. Today, if you look on the History News Network, they ask him for a response to actually just a summary of the argument of my book, and he says, "Who's Horowitz?" He's a liar. Noam Chomsky pulled the same thing on me. Oh, I never read Horowitz. I don't know who he is. I never read anything he wrote, and then I, turned up the book in which he quoted one of my, one of my articles. It's easy to just fight a political food fight, but you don't really want Duke University to be an expensive version of the Hannity and Combs show. The Hannity and Combs show serves a certain purpose, airing political opinions. Our public life is filled with food fights. It shouldn't be a university. It shouldn't be like that.
Mr. Horowitz, in your speech today, you talked a lot about academic corruption and a lack of intellectualism, and as I'm sure you're aware of, based on some people's reactions, a lack of civil discourse. And I recently went on your website, Front Page Mag, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're the editor of Front Page Magazine?
Yeah, I have three people who edited it. I read it when I can. I'm on the road a lot. Go ahead.
And on Front Page Magazine, I just browsed through a bunch of things, and I saw several authors, and I was just curious as to what some of the views expressed on this magazine that you are so famously attributed with express. And
so in addition to my 200,000 words a year, let's see, we publish 10 articles a day. Let's say there's, 2,000 words in an article. That's 20,000 words a day. That's 100. You want to hold me to every word that appears on the site?
No, that's not correct.
Is that where we're going?
I just wanted to ask you about the because you apparently read the magazine. You're affiliated with it for in whatever capacity that you are.
I don't really get a chance to read, but go ahead.
Okay. I feel like in talking about civil discourse, one of the other writers on the magazine that I thought was of particular interest was Miss Coulter, Ann Coulter. I'm sure you're aware of her.
Let's leave Ann alone. Ann is a great satirist, and people on the left have apparently no sense of humor.
Some of her.
So just forget that. Civility. Now, just a second. I would tell you a little anecdote. I have a conservative lunch forum in L.A., And I invited Leon Panetta, who was Clinton's chief of staff, to speak to my group. And there were maybe 150 conservatives. And Panetta has now retired, and this is a couple of years ago actually, he has a statesmanship institute in Monterey. And he gave a perfectly wonderful speech. And when he criticized Clinton, he criticized Gore, he criticized Republicans. It was about civic responsibility. It was all the kind of nuance and civility that you could possibly want. And my conservative audience loved it. And I was struck by this scene. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, Mr. Panetta, I said, I used to see you on the television and I wanted to throw my shoe at the tube, but what you just said was marvelous. What happened? And he said, oh, that's just the partisan thing. That was just the partisan thing. And, you know, for me, that was a revelation, because I had never met Panetta before, that behind all of these figures who are, when you're in the political debate, it's hammer and tong and tooth and nail, and you may regret that and deplore it, but it's really been like that since the founding of the Republic. That's what politics is, and there's reasons for it. And, you know, much as politicians don't get respected too much, and radio talk show hosts, they do an important job in our society. But it's not the kind of job that's suitable to an academic classroom. This is an arena in which people can be reflective, in which they ought to be able to entertain unthinkable ideas. You have this rare opportunity to think outside the box, but you have so much political correctness, which is party line stuff, dripping on this campus, that on certain areas, I know that every student in this room has to walk on eggshells, as every professor does, lest the thought police, generally housed in the literature department, the Black Studies department, the Women's Studies department, the John Hope Franklin Center on this campus, you know, will ruin your career or make life really miserable for you if you cross the line. That's terrible. Universities have never been less free than they have been in the last 20 years. And it's because of the political commissars who have taken control of large sections of the liberal arts faculties here. And my book is to, you know, my crusade is to sort of, since they really can't touch me, I don't have, you know, a job here, is to try to encourage all the forces that would damp down their enthusiasms, shall we put it that way.
If I may quickly...
But I have not called for any, as I said, I defended Ward Churchill. I've defended Leonard Jeffries, who was a black racist on the CUNY campus, for the same reason. If professors want to embarrass themselves in public, that's what the First Amendment is about, but not in the classroom.
If I may quickly ask, on Front Page Magazine, Ms. Coulter, as well as some other authors, in talking about Muslim and Arab Americans, and specifically certain Muslim and Arab Americans, Ms. Coulter specifically used the racist remarks camel jockey, jihad monkey, tent merchant, and ragheads throughout several of her articles. And earlier you talked about how we should cherish America and how far it has come from when it started.
If you've read my website, you know there are many Muslims who...
where we're going with
Look, if you've read my website, there are many Muslims who publish on my website. But we are in a war with fanatical Islamists who behead innocent people, who blow up little children. They are evil. You listen to me. They are evil. They are the enemy, and I will treat them as the enemy. And I'm not going to, you know, dignify these. This is a ridiculous attack on Ann Coulter. Reality is that leftists can dish it out, but they can't take it.
Hey, first let me say that your speech is the first time I've ever had any exposure to your views. I haven't read any of these pamphlets that some people are bringing up with their questions. So my question is based purely on what you've said in your speech.
Okay.
Your hypothesis seems to be that since the Vietnam War, the board, all the faculty basically of major universities have become more leftist and turned their classes into indoctrination sessions?
No, I said 10%.
All right.
And I said it was located, there are certain faculties, the anthropology, I mean, I can tell you, the field of anthropology has been destroyed as an academic field by the political left. What you get when you go into anthropology, is this claptrap about race, gender, and class hierarchies, which is what you'll probably get in sociology and certainly get in African American studies departments and in women's studies departments and in peace studies. That's what I said. You also get it in whiteness studies, which is the only ethnic studies that's about how white people are evil. Well, they're all about how white people are evil, but at least in black studies, you get that black people are they're beautiful and they're oppressed, and women are strong and they're oppressed. In women's studies and whiteness studies, white people are evil. So it's how you get bored with this stuff. I mean, it is stupid. It is reactionary and retrograde. It's like people never emerged from the 1930s and Stalinism on these campuses, and it's just an embarrassment. So, I didn't say all professors indoctrinate. I began the evening by excluding most of the faculties on this campus, actually. But the fact is that when you come in as an undergraduate, you are in their clutches, and that's partly because they require you to take their courses, because they're very good at politics. So every university has a multicultural requirement which will put you in the hands of a raving leftist. Sorry, that's just the reality. Right? And you must have missed when I said this doesn't happen at schools like Kenyon and Reed. And Reed is a university that boasts that 85% of its students' body is left-wing. But it has a traditional curriculum, and it's and a good one. Well, what's the end of your question?
I was just asking for clarification there. Basically, my question is, since the Vietnam War, the American population has become markedly more conservative, like both in their voting and their political activism and in how they represent themselves in opinion polls. So my question is are we facing an actual threat from a black studies or women's studies department that may preach anti-Americanism? Because it doesn't seem like it's having a dramatic effect on the population.
There's a number of things. This is a fairly recent development. I mean, I have friends who graduated Harvard in 1979. We had this discussion the other day. He said, I never heard a professor make a political comment or express a political point of view in class. It's quite recent because the 60s generation had to become tenured and they had to get real control. Ethnic studies is another bad field from that point of view. Secondly, it's unclear where the country has gone. I am a John F. Kennedy liberal. If you really want to look at my politics, it's John F. Kennedy liberalism. John F. Kennedy had politics identical. This is a Democratic Party liberal icon, identical to Ronald Reagan's. He was a hawk on defense, the biggest military buildup in peacetime history. He was a militant anti-communist. He was for a capital gains tax cut, and he was for a balanced budget. The country, seen from that point of view, has shifted left. The Democratic Party is today a left-wing party. It had not been that in the past. In the days of Harry Truman, when my parents were in the Democratic Party, of course, as all communists were, they marched out in 1948 and formed the Progressive Party, which was controlled by the Communist Party. Today, I don't want to go into this is a whole other discussion, but radicals are in the heart now of the Democratic Party, and that is a tragedy for this country.
I just want to say that we only have time, unfortunately, for one more question. However, people who want to ask questions will get a chance to do so at the book signing. And I'd like to thank, once again, on behalf of the Duke Chapter of Students for Academic Freedom, everyone for coming out here today. Thank you very much.
Hi. Is this on? Hi, my name's Jacinta Green, and I'm telling you my name because I want you to remember me. First of all, it's not Black Studies anymore, it's African and African American Studies because it's a large diaspora. And unless you're on a name-to-name basis with Dr. Winiba Lubiano, I think you should address her as so. And I was just wondering, I was reading in the Chronicle, and I'm an ignorant student, and I mean, I'm being taught by all these Marxist professors that I'm being taught to be racist and Marxist. And I was just wondering, what do you want to do with Black Studies then? I mean, because to not learn about your history and your past is to take power and education away from them. And I was just wondering what you want me to do as an angry, not Black, but biracial female, what you want me to do about that.
All right. I didn't, I will respect Wanima Lubiano when she shows me some respect. I will respect Wanima Lubiano when she shows me some respect. I don't have her, I brought all these, there's so many things you have to have, and I don't have the vicious email that she sent to Steve Miller. And the second answer is that the African American Studies Department at Harvard, the Du Bois Institute, is what with some exceptions, like Cornell West, who's now gone, is a respectable academic department with standards. And that is, although I have, many problems with Henry Louis Gates, it's a real achievement of Gates to have established intellectual standards. And Gerald Early, who is I don't know if he's anymore, but was the head of the African American or Black Studies, I mean, it varies from school to school, Studies Department, also established a very credible academic department there. By contrast, the Afrocentric department at Temple is a pure racist department. And the department at Duke has very, very low intellectual standards. So if you want to find out about, if you really are interested in the state of, future of, and history of Black people in this country, you want to begin to familiarize yourself with the writings, first of all and foremost, the most important writer on racial and cultural issues in this country, Thomas Sowell, who you probably have never heard of because you are having ignorance instilled in you by ideological professors who deny you access to conservative Black thinkers. Shelby Steele will be out with I see he's going to be on C-SPAN with a new book. Read his book. And, that will help you deal with this issue. So again, I respect people who respect me. I think that one of the problems in this university, in those areas of it that I pointed my finger at, is a lack of respect. Lack of respect starts with the president, but goes right down to conservative intellectuals whose books are not assigned, whose arguments are not confronted, and it just deprives you. I mean, I will finish with the slogan of my campaign, which is, you can't get a good education if they're only telling you half the story, even if you're paying $43,000 a year. Thank you.
David Horowitz is president of the Center for the Study of Popular Culture in Los Angeles. For more on Mr. Horowitz and his latest book, visit dangerousprofessors.net.